Good evening. Glad you all could be with us this evening, and appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to come over and help us officially welcome Ken Blackwell. And you know, we don't tell Ken, but we don't do this every Tuesday night. Certain expectations he has, but this is it's exciting for us in Family Research Council to have Ken Blackwell joining us. A lot of people don't know this about me. A lot of people, I'm from Louisiana. That is my home. That's where I live. But as I informed the staff today, there was some concern that when I came here, I was bringing people from Louisiana. There was like this Louisiana. Well, now it is. The truth has been unveiled. There is a conspiracy here, but it's a Cincinnati conspiracy. I was actually born in Cincinnati. I grew up there. My family, a lot of my family is there. Our executive vice president, Chuck Donovan, is from Cincinnati. And Ken, former mayor of Cincinnati, that is his home as well. So there's a, I think it might be the, if you've ever been to Cincinnati and had the chili, I think it's the chili connection. But anyway, we're excited about having Ken here. I've watched him from a distance prior to coming to FRC, and then having been involved in Ohio during the 2004 election with the marriage issue. Ken's leadership is absolutely critical, along with Phil Burris, who I believe is here tonight, the work that they did there. And Ken, you know, it's easy from a distance for us on the outside to undervalue the role that elected officials play in critical issues. And it's easy when everyone else is running for the high grass to do the same yourself. And the politicians in Ohio, as in many other states, when the marriage issue came up, they ran for the tall grass, except one, and that was Ken Blackwell. And he stood strong on the principles of marriage from an elected standpoint, and speaking to why marriage was important to the culture. And he became a rallying point for pastors and for others, working closely with Phil and the other organizations there. It was very strategic, and he was very instrumental, as you know, not only in the marriage issue, but that also had an implication for the entire country with the presidential election. Well, let me just briefly give you a formal introduction. Some of you may not be familiar with this complete background, but Ken is going to be coming here as a senior fellow for family empowerment. In this new role, Ken will lead FRC's efforts in addressing family economics, tax reform, and education, issues that he has passionately spoken and worked on. Many of you know Ken from, as I mentioned, his election campaign in 2006 for governor in the state of Ohio, the first African American in history to be a major party nominee for governor in that state. Previously, he served in the statewide elected office of both Treasurer and Secretary of State. His career is long and distinguished. He's no stranger to this city here in Washington. He served as Undersecretary at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development and U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations on Human Rights Commission, where he led the U.S. delegation to all four of the preparatory meetings for the 1993 World Conference on Human Rights. His list of accomplishments continue. Ken has a long record of achievement as a finance executive, an entrepreneur, a diplomat, educator, independent corporate director. He is one of the nation's leading conservative voices and a strong advocate for free market enterprise and tax reform. The Wall Street Journal has compared his policies and principles to those of former President Ronald Reagan. And perhaps most importantly, and certainly fitting for his role here at the Family Research Council, Ken has been married to his wife, first wife, Rosa, for 39 years, and they have successfully raised 3 grown children. Tonight, we're looking forward to hearing his thoughts on the elections of 2006 and the elections directly ahead in 2008. And it is indeed a privilege to welcome Ken Blackwell as a senior fellow here at the
Tony told the assembled staff earlier today that I played football. He didn't tell some of the fun stories that I will tell briefly. We played Quantico Marines annually at Xavier University. In my junior year, Tony, a staff sergeant playing across the line from me, gave me a physical education that to the classroom education that the Jesuits provided. So complete was the whooping that he put on me that I spent every day in the next year in chapel, praying that he not be sent to Vietnam so I might return the lesson next time. I think he did. And for those of you who are doubters, God answered. And delivered him unto me. In one complete half, I was putting the whooping back on him. Beginning of the third quarter, I did one of my patent moves, pushed him to the ground, sidestepping, and instead of tapping a 240-pound Marine fullback cleanly with my shoulder, my chin got the way. I was knocked out momentarily. They sent me to Good Samaritan Hospital. They did head x-rays. They sent me back to the field. 3 Jesuits met me at the sideline, Chuck, and laid hands on me. Prayed for me and sent me back into the game. And now, we won that game, 7-6, and legend has it that the next day, the Cincinnati Enquirer, the newspaper record in my hometown, showed a headline that read that actually made my dear mom wince. The headline read, Blackwell, head x-rays show nothing. I didn't tell you that story before. Just in case. But it is a delight to be with you. Now, I am going to share my observations on the lessons learned in 2006 and what those lessons might present for the future as they apply to 2000. But I thought that I would also give you a greater insight into who I am by telling you another story that has application to the situation that political leaders and political parties find themselves in as we gather this evening. My uncle, D. Hart Hubbard, most of you all probably have never heard of him, but he was the first African American to win an Olympic gold medal in an individual event. He won that Olympic gold medal in the 1924 Olympic Games in Paris, France. What was unique about my uncle was that he had qualified for 3 Olympic events. He had qualified for the 100-yard dash, the high hurdles, and the broad jump. He thought he was the fastest human being on the face of the earth. And there was another young man across the waters, across the Atlantic, who thought he was the fastest human being on the face of the earth. His name was Eric Little. And you might have heard of Eric Little, who was a Christian missionary who actually got to Paris, and history dealt him an interesting hand. Now, my uncle, who had qualified for 3 events, was prohibited from competing in all but one event. He had to choose the broad jump. The International Olympic Committee, for a reason only known to them and their hearts, would not allow him to run or qualify in the 100-yard dash or the high hurdles. And Eric Little got dealt a hand that his faith, his religion, his church prohibited him from competing athletically on the Sabbath. And in 1924, the finals fell on the Sabbath. And he had to make a choice. He had to make a choice between breaking faith and running the world in glory, or choosing fidelity to faith and principle. And he chose fidelity to faith and principle. My Uncle D. Hart came back home, and he was my great uncle, so he preached and talked about his good friend, Eric Little, to my mom's generation and to my generation. For 12 years, he interfaced and argued with the International Olympic Committee about making sure that playing fields were even, that nobody was given an unfair advantage, and nobody had their titles of being the best, lessened by not being able to compete against the best. Well, a couple of things happened along the way, and in 1994, I was sitting next to Jesse Owens at an event at Ohio State University. Mrs. Owens said to me, she said, your uncle was my husband's hero. And I said, no, I didn't know that. And she said, well, let me just tell you something about your uncle. She said, in his own mind, it was important for him to establish that he was as good as he thought he was. And in 1925, he established the world record in the 100-yard dash. She said, but more importantly, he stayed engaged with the International Olympic Committee, and 12 years after he had been prohibited from competing in the 3 events in which he had been qualified for, in Germany, Jesse was able to run in 4 events and win 4 gold medals. Now, I tell you that because I think political parties and political leaders have to be committed to principle and have to show fidelity to principle in order to lead in these very, very tough times in the 21st century. Those 2 individuals, tied not by human blood, but by the only blood that counts, both showed what it takes and why America is such a uniquely fashioned experiment. One, Eric Little, though not an American, showed the importance of believing in something and showing fidelity to it. My uncle, in my estimation, showed that you must stay engaged in evening the playing field and letting people rise or fall on their own merit. The real essence of what it means to live in a genuinely free society. Now, how does that apply to what happened in 2006? I think that the Republican Party broke faith with its principle. And people made the party pay a price in general, almost across the board, for that infidelity. That there is an overriding lesson to come out of the 2006 election, is that you cannot presume to take your constituents for granted, that your hands on the reins of power are not permanently cemented there, and that majorities don't last forever. But there's also a more important overriding understanding that comes from the 2006 experience, and that is that culture matters. That cultures are not just to be taken for granted. Cultures must be renewed and defended on a day-to-day basis. And that's why it's so important to me and such a delight for me to be affiliated with the Family Research Council, because for over 25 years, they've understood that culture matters. And that only when we attend to culture can we strengthen the family, and can we encourage and support healthy marriages. And it's only when we have a reverence for the sanctity of life can we give birth to a political system and a political superstructure that truly respects life and nurtures it and creates systems and policies consistent with the Supreme Author's will and direction. 2006, the Republican Party was exposed for moral corruption, managerial incompetence, and public policy duplicity. There's a lesson to be learned by leaders and parties is that you must attend to your base. And in this case, the center-right coalition that delivered victories in 2004 and in 2000, going all the way back to the landmark victory of 1994, people gave Republicans a chance to be something different. And what we did over that period of 12 years was to present a package that was actually more of a same. And I think that what we saw is that the voters said, on the one hand, that if we want big government liberals, we will in fact go with real big government liberals. And they in fact chose Democrats. On the other hand, if you look at the language that was used by candidates on both sides of the aisle, now some might have been using it as a classic head fake. But if you look at the language that was used by both parties, it suggests that we are at least at one level winning the war, because it wasn't that they were moving to the language of the left. They were moving to the language of the center-right coalition. And many of the folks who had invested in that center-right coalition basically said, you guys have been in control. And Ohio was for 16 years. Let me tell you, it was very difficult. And it was not without its price. To be the head of the ticket of the party that had been in control for 16 years, and Ohio had the third highest tax rate. It was losing